Curse of the Kichai Shaman. Chapter 16. The drama unfolds. David had driven to Navasota on Sunday night. He was nervous because the dream he had where Nick had warned him about this Monday. David had woken up Monday morning and was disappointed. He had hoped he would have a dream to clarify some of the burning questions in his mind. But he did not dream. He got dressed and went down to the buffet to have a bite to eat. After he finished his pastry and coffee, he got out his phone and looked at his notes app. Under the title Dream, he had written, "They will come Monday at 9:35 a.m. Call the sheriff at 9 a.m. Report a man with a long gun 100 yards away to the north wearing black. Stay down. Keep everyone else down." David went out to his truck in the parking lot. He was paranoid and purged his truck by running the air conditioner while he waited outside of it. He then drove to work at the historical site. At the morning meeting, he really wanted to warn everybody, but they would think him crazy if nothing happened. The meeting ended, and he went out to the Hatfields Exchange site. In the unit he was digging in, he had located some foundation bricks that were oriented with the way the building was originally aligned. After locating the bricks, most of what he found was broken glass. The glass had small bubbles in some of the pieces, indicating that the glass was hand-blown and old. He had also found a metal button that would have been covered with cloth matching the outfit it was sewn on, and he found a musket ball that had not been fired. The unit he was in had been dug to a depth of 30 centimeters, which is close to a foot deep. Cindy was in a unit next to his, and it was 40 centimeters deep as she had started on it at an earlier date than David had started on his. Jacob was 2 units over from Cindy, and his unit was the same depth as David's. Dan was set up under the canopy at the screening site where they put the dirt they dug through boxes with metal mesh screens on the bottom. He was painstakingly logging in the artifacts that were collected. At 9 a.m., the alarm David had set went off. He looked to the north but did not see anything. But he got out his phone and called the non-emergency number to the Washington County Sheriff's Office. A woman dispatcher answered the call. He told her that he was working at the Washington on the Brazos historical site and had seen a man dressed in black with a rifle off to the north in the wood line. She said, "Just a second," and she started recording the call. She then asked David if he could repeat what he had said. David said, "My name is David Madur, and I am here at the Washington on the Brazos historical site out at the Hatfields Exchange area near the old Washington Town Site Loop Trail. And I saw a man in black with a rifle skulking around the wood line to the north of my position. I am an archaeologist working on a dig at the Hatfields Exchange site, and I know there is no hunting in this area." The dispatcher then said, "Okay, we will send some deputies out there." David said, "Thank you," and ended the call. David hoped he was not acting crazy. After all, it was just a dream. He stopped digging and had his eyes fixed to the north. At the Washington County Sheriff's Office, the dispatcher took the call seriously and dispatched a patrol car to check it out. Deputy Franklin and Deputy Priest got the radio call and began to head that way. Lieutenant Drake heard the call on the radio, and he headed that way. A few minutes after this was when Diane had dropped off Chris and Ethan. They had headed off down the small brush-covered ravine and walked quickly through the field toward the pin located on their GPS device. Diane had driven to the parking area of the historical site and parked at 9:25 when she saw a sheriff's car pull into the parking lot. She immediately got out her burner phone and called the number she had memorized. A man answered, and Diane began to talk in Latin. The man on the phone said, "I am sorry, you must have the wrong number." Diane then called the number again, but she reversed 2 of the numbers that she thought she had gotten wrong on the first call. The phone rang a few times. Then a computerized voice said, "We are sorry. The number you have reached has been disconnected or is no longer in service." Diane panicked. She could no longer think straight. She had forgotten the number she was supposed to memorize. The sheriff's deputies, in the meantime, started walking down the old Washington Town Site Loop Trail. David was on his knees in his unit looking to the north when he finally saw the 2 men peeking out of the wood line. David took his phone and called the number he had for the patrol deputy lieutenant. Lieutenant Drake answered the phone. David explained that he had called the sheriff's office earlier about a man with a rifle. He told Lieutenant Drake that he had a visual on 2 men, one with a rifle and one with binoculars peeking out from under a bush. Lieutenant Drake had pulled into the parking area. Diane was frazzled. She was panicked and not in a clear state of mind. She called 2 more wrong numbers on her burner phone and could not reach Ethan. Ethan and Chris had made it to the pinned location on their GPS device and had put their camouflaged blanket down under a scrubby bush and were both lying there looking in the direction of David. Ethan said, "I see him. He's on the phone and looking our way." He had spotted David through his binoculars. Chris was getting his rifle ready. Chris then said, "The wind is blowing hard from the left. I'm going to come 3 clicks left." And he adjusted his rifle scope by turning the dial 3 clicks counterclockwise, then looked through the scope and lined the crosshairs up on David and fired. A loud shot rang out. The shot hit about 4 feet to the left of David and kicked up a cloud of dirt. David yelled that there was a man with a gun and to stay down. Cindy and Jacob hunkered down in their units. Diane called Venator. She told him that the cops had come and that she had got the number to Ethan's burner phone mixed up and could not remember. Venator did not remember the number either and had to go and find his notes. One of the 2 deputies that had arrived earlier called on the radio that shots had been fired. Then they both drew their pistols and began to run in that direction. Lieutenant Drake heard the shot from his car, heard the radio call from the deputy and called in more units on his radio then, grabbed his AR-15 assault rifle and ran towards the sound of the shot. Ethan told Chris that his shot was to the left. Chris, in a panic, turned the elevation knob 3 clicks clockwise, thinking he was adjusting the windage to the right. He loaded another round, and looking through the scope could see the top of David's head just above the side of his unit's hole. He fired a second shot that went high. Ethan could not tell where it went while looking through his binoculars. He yelled out, "I could not see it." Chris reloaded his rifle. He gave up on trying to adjust the scope and aimed at David's head that was still sticking up, then moved his sight down a little and fired. The shot hit to the left again, kicking up a cloud of dirt. Chris reloaded and aimed low and to the right and fired. The shot hit near David but missed by about 2 feet to the right, kicking up a cloud of dirt. David ducked his head down, but now his back was in view of Chris and Ethan. Chris loaded another round into his rifle and aimed low and a little less to the right and fired. The shot hit about 6 inches to the left of David. By this time, Deputy Franklin and Deputy Priest were getting close. They heard the lieutenant call on the radio that he was coming up with a rifle. The 2 deputies were both military veterans that had served in Afghanistan. Deputy Franklin had been a ranger in the Army, and Deputy Priest had been a Marine. They knew that heading straight towards the gunmen would be suicidal, so they headed to the wood line to the left of them so they could have better cover and flank them. By the time Venator had gotten his notes and got back on the phone, Chris had fired 5 shots already. When Venator went to tell Diane the number, she interrupted him and said she had heard more than 1 shot. Venator said, "That's impossible. Chris is a scout sniper and would only need 1 shot." He then gave her the number and she hung up to call it. Chris was in a full-blown panic. He removed the box magazine and fumbled in his pocket for a bit to retrieve his box of ammunition. He had 2 boxes of ammunition in his pocket. One was opened and one was still sealed. In his desperate state, he had grabbed the full box that was sealed and fumbled with it, trying to open it. While he was doing this, Ethan pulled out his Glock 9mm pistol. Lieutenant Drake had run at full sprint directly towards the rifle shots and had come upon David, Cindy, and Jacob taking cover in their shallow holes as best they could. Lieutenant Drake was about to ask where the gunman was when Ethan began to take pot shots with his pistol 100 yards away. Chris had managed to load his magazine with 5 more rounds by this time, when Lieutenant Drake began placing well-aimed shots into Ethan. This caused Chris to drop his box magazine and duck his head. Lieutenant Drake had fired 10 rounds standing in the open. Diane had called Ethan's phone by this time, and it began to ring. Ethan was in no shape to answer it. Lieutenant Drake then ducked down into one of the open units that was about 8 inches deep in the prone position. He slowed his rate of fire but kept a steady suppressive fire on the area. Ethan had been hit 3 times by Lieutenant Drake's first 10 shots and was out of the fight, having dropped his pistol and curled up his body. The phone in his pocket was ringing. Chris somehow managed to put the box magazine back in his rifle and was cycling the bolt when Deputies Franklin and Priest came up from the left and behind Chris. Deputy Priest yelled, "Drop the gun!" Chris, startled, came up from the prone position as he closed the bolt loading a round and was swinging the rifle around trying to point it at Deputy Priest, but he never made it. Lieutenant Drake, seeing Chris rise up, put well-aimed shots into him from the front as Deputies Franklin and Priest Mag dumped all the shots in their pistols in Chris's direction from behind and to the left. Chris was hit 9 times, twice by Lieutenant Drake from the front. He was hit once in the head and once in his chest. He was hit 3 times in his back by Deputy Priest and 4 times in his back and legs by Deputy Franklin. Diane heard all the gunshots and was letting the phone ring trying to get a hold of Ethan, but it was too late. After 10 rings, she ended the call. Deputies Franklin and Priest both ejected their pistol magazines and quickly loaded another. But seeing the gunman was down, Deputy Franklin yelled, "Cease fire! Cease fire!" Deputy Franklin could see that Chris had dropped the rifle and had slumped over, and he could see that Ethan's pistol was out of his hand about 2 feet away from his body. Deputy Franklin got on the radio and said, "2 suspects down." Lieutenant Drake got on the radio and said, "Hold cover, there could be more of them." 2 other deputies, who had heard the initial call reporting a man with a rifle, had headed in the direction of the Washington on the Brazos historical site. When they heard the call for additional units, they ran their lights and sirens. Deputy Hancock's and Deputy Hadlock had arrived at the end of the gunfight and had heard the final shots. They got out of their car and sprinted in the direction of gunshots. They came up and found Lieutenant Drake at the Hatfields Exchange dig site. Altogether, the 3 of them approached the 2 downed gunmen. Deputy Franklin and Deputy Priest came out of the wood line and joined the other 3 deputies. Deputies Hancock and Hadlock held lethal cover while Deputies Franklin and Priest put on latex gloves. Lieutenant Drake commanded from behind them, and they all approached Chris and Ethan. Deputies Franklin and Priest first went to Chris, moved the rifle away and handcuffed him behind his back. They then went to Ethan and moved his pistol further away and went to handcuff him behind his back. Ethan moaned when they moved him. Lieutenant Drake called on his radio to roll emergency medical services to their location. Deputy Priest saw the ranger patches on Chris's shoulder and pointed them out to Deputy Franklin, saying, "Look, he's one of your guys." Deputy Franklin said, "I don't believe it." Diane had called Venator back and told him about all the gunfire and said that she could not get a hold of Ethan. Venator told her to get out of there and come back to Marjorie's house. Diane started her BMW and drove to the exit. Just as she got out of the historical site, some more deputies arrived and sealed the exit, preventing anyone from leaving. As she turned onto FM 1155, she saw an ambulance headed to the historical site. Once Ethan and Chris were handcuffed, Deputy Franklin asked if anyone had a first aid kit. Deputy Hancock ran back in the direction of the patrol car he had come in. He got the medical bag out of the trunk and ran back to the other deputies. Deputy Hancock was winded and handed the bag off to Deputy Priest, and he and Deputy Franklin started rendering aid. Chris looked dead, but Ethan was moaning, so they began to cut off his black utility top. They discovered 4 bullet wounds on Ethan. One was on the top of his shoulder, one was through the front of his shoulder and had come out his back, and he had 1 bullet wound in his chest just under his neck on the left side. They were both holding pressure on the wounds when the emergency medical technicians from the ambulance arrived and took over. The emergency medical technicians put bandages on 3 of Ethan's bullet wounds and a chest seal on his chest wound. They checked Chris but found no sign of life. Chris had a nasty head wound from Lieutenant Drake's AR-15 that he could not have survived, so they called the county coroner. Ethan was transported to Baylor Scott and White Medical Center in Brenham in critical condition.